So we're after a better burn, okay? Now we're going to look at a little bit of thermodynamics. There's a whole bunch of things going on actually when you light a match. There's still moisture content in that matchstick, so you immediately evaporates, drive off the remaining water in there. Then it undergoes something called pyrolysis. In the bottom, pyrolysis releases most of the non-carbon gaseous components, which are ignitable, and then gasification itself. So the two important things that we can really capture out of burning something, and two ways to do it, is gasification, which releases a whole bunch of energy and leaves a little bit of the base carbon components of that biomass fuel source. And the other is pyrolysis, which produces some energy and retains a whole bunch of the original carbon components of that woody fuel. Okay? Those are kind of our two choices as to the process of burning an albizia or a tree in your backyard. Okay? We can either get a whole bunch of energy, capture as much energy out of it, and have a little bit of charcoal left over, or we can capture a little bit of energy and have a whole bunch of charcoal left over. When we first kind of entered into this, we were really chasing the bottom one, pyrolysis, because that seemed, man, that was the holy grail, right? If we can get energy out of this tree and retain most of the carbon, right, and maybe put that back in the ground, we've really solved the issue, right? We've got our energy, and we've kept that carbon even from going back in the atmosphere. And if we do that, now we potentially got a carbon negative way of producing the energy that we need, okay? As it turns out, you can do pyrolysis, right? Essentially, that's just charcoal making, all right? And it is a well-developed technology at two scales. Industrial scale, if you go to Europe, Canada, parts of Australia that have large stands of timber, right? There are pyrolysis plants that use timber to produce energy through pyrolysis, and they use that charcoal for kind of fancy industrial needs, okay? But that requires huge amounts of standing biomass very close to this giant industrial plant. The other scale is that people are now producing wood cooking stoves for third world countries that are pyrolysis units rather than just gasifiers. And that allows those people to take that charcoal they use from cooking dinner and put it back in their garden, and for the reasons that we'll talk about in just a little bit. Turns out, nobody's really put together the technology that you and I might want to do. You know, if we've got a gated community, oil prices go too high, we're going to set up our own little energy generation. The technology for pyrolysis isn't really quite there. And it might not be, right? Because the energy, the trade-off, you got to decide, wow, you know, are we really going to be gardeners and use all that charcoal to produce our own food, or are we really most interested in the energy, all right? Right now, most of us are interested in the energy, right? Most of us are not farmers. So we want the energy. In the pursuit of this technology and solutions for this issue, we were chasing pyrolysis, and now we've kind of drifted off into gasification, which I'll explain is a much more well-developed technology with systems available to kind of the ordinary backyard or community person of interest. And the one we kind of focused on is what's called downdraft gasification, okay? And again, these are very, very old technologies, so I explained that were in use by the millions in World War II. So during wartime, you know, food, petroleum, fuel, everything was confiscated by the government for the war effort. So people, being clever, they came up with all these things a long, long time ago. So what happens in a downdraft gasifier is that the fuel is loaded up top. It's either kind of batch like this one, or you can have auger-fed kind of constant feed. And it moves down through gravity. The air comes in on the sides and the bottom, and there's a bed of charcoal. As it moves down, it becomes burned, moves down, and the embers are captured in the bottom. So what happens in this system is 4 processes of combustion. Wood always contains some moisture, so initially moisture is driven off just by fairly low temperatures. As heat rises in that we'll call it stove. Then pyrolysis. Pyrolysis at the top, remember that the fuel is moving down, right? And the air is down here. So the air is not, the heat, that wood is heating up before the air can get there. And the air is what causes it to actually combust. So first it's heating up, it's getting so hot, right, without air, that it just it evaporates most of those compounds with the exception of the carbon. That's pyrolysis. Then combustion. Then you add air to it. Boom, everything explodes like in an internal combustion engine, right? It's burned. Then what happens is because you're sucking that air, all the air and all the gases, down. It's not going up like a chimney. It's going down. So you're pulling all that stuff, all the air, all the volatiles, down through those hot coals, which are 1200 degrees centigrade. Now you've created a reducing environment. Combustion is an oxidizing environment. You're oxidizing it, adding oxygen. You pull it down through the coals, now it's a reducing environment. You're stripping oxygen off. So when you combust something, when I breathe out, same thing, right? Whether it's the tailpipe of the car or my mouth, what do I breathe out? What do we breathe out? Carbon dioxide and water. We added oxygen to those fuels, right? When you put carbon dioxide and water in a reducing environment and we strip oxygen, what do we get? Hydrogen and carbon monoxide, that's right. As it turns out, both are combustible gases. So what this is, technology is, this is a miniature refinery, right? Where you can take a piece of wood, right? Just fuel. And when I do this demonstration with kids, they immediately get it. That tree is a battery. It's exactly what it is. It is a battery. So we've got a battery with all this potential energy in it, but we have a car which is not designed to run on a piece of wood. So how do we get the fuel, how do we refine a piece of wood into a fuel that will now run our existing infrastructure? This is the way to do it. It's a miniature refinery. You take the carbon in the wood and all these other crazy compounds, you run it through an oxidizing, reducing environment, and you get two combustible gases, hydrogen, carbon monoxide. Another example of what's going on. So input is carbon dioxide and water goes through those reducing coals, they're stripped, and now you have combustible gases that now can be oxidized. So really now what we're doing in an internal combustion engine, that's what we do, right? In your mitochondria, in an engine, that's an oxidizing environment. You put in oxygen, you either light a match, or you get some heat from metabolism, things go boom, all right? That's what we're doing here. So now, to get this is interesting. So now we have an oxidizing, reducing, oxidizing environment to generate power. Because really what we have millions and millions and millions of engines out there. It's quiet in here now. But somewhere around here, there's an engine running to produce all this stuff, right? And we need some type of fuel to run those things. And we're not going to be replacing all our millions and millions of diesel and spark ignition engines by all new fancy technology for the reasons that I just said earlier. It's not going to happen. We're going to have to figure out ways of using what we already have going forward. And interestingly enough, we have this 100-year-old technology, right, that we can control. We're not going to let somebody else take control of burning our most precious resources that we have. We're going to do it ourselves. And this is how we do it. So this is an old technology during World War II in Europe. Mercedes, Volkswagen were producing vehicles with these refineries right in them, hidden in the trunks. You couldn't even see it, right? You'd pull over, you'd load it with some more wood, and you would go down the road. This is an old technology, okay? And interestingly enough, it's fairly simple, right? We're not talking about, microchips and gizmos. I mean, it's essentially a tube and a tube. It's a pot-bellied stove is what it is, My grandmother grew up, sitting around this in the middle of winter. It's not quite that simple, but it's pretty simple, okay? I'll tell you another interesting story. So we found these, and there are a lot of people that are reviving this now, okay? Gasification is, again, standard industry technology at the large scale, something called fluidized beds, all right? And that way you can put in any type of junk fuel you want in there and you can burn it, okay? These are very, very fuel specific. You've got to have just the right fuel to make it all work, all right? So it's all about how you can turn that Albizia or that YV or that guinea grass into something usable, okay? So there's these guys, and there's a whole bunch of people kind of chasing this to improve the technology that they developed during World War II. We found these guys out of Berkeley, California. This is a great education story. These guys are a bunch of, postmodern hippies. You guys ever heard of the Burning Man? You guys are upstanding citizens. Oh, we got one radical right up here. Burning Man is just an insane thing that they do in the middle of the desert, in the mainland, and they burn all sorts of crazy stuff, including these giant pyrotechnic things they build. It's insane. These guys in Berkeley are the guys that run the Burning Man, right? And so they live in these Quonset hut, trailer kind of things in downtown Berkeley, and under the guise of darkness, their welders are going all year and they create these insane things. Right? And somehow they got away with doing this for 20 years with no permits, no nothing in downtown Berkeley, right? So finally, Big Brother comes knocking and goes, what are you guys doing down here? You guys have no permit, you have nothing. And they're going, we're just doing our trip. So, and they couldn't get rid of them. I guess, leaseholds in California are really strict, so they couldn't get rid of them. So the only thing the city of Berkeley could figure out to do is shut off their electricity. So, being good, anti-establishment guys are like, we're going to make our own energy, right? And so they have this great little, miniature collapse experience of society chasing power, right? So immediately these guys, a bunch of hippies, anthropologists, a bunch of guys, and immediately went back to school at adjacent Berkeley, learned thermodynamics and electricity and all this kind of stuff, and they made their own photovoltaic panels. Oh wow, they covered all their shipping containers with photovoltaic panels. Turn on the welder. Nothing happens, right? You can turn on the lights with photovoltaic panels. You try real industrial power, you try to run a pump, you try to run a welder, it ain't gonna happen, right? Oh, then we'll make our own biodiesel. They're being real greenies. They realize that all crop oil production is from oil-produced industrial agriculture. That didn't. So they're chasing power. They're chasing the power, right? So they realize you got to burn something. The same way. So, and being greenies, they're like, all right, we're going to burn something. We're going to burn it ourselves. So we have control over the environmental impacts. So they found this technology, looked it up, and off they go on producing their own power. So now they're off the grid, burning junk that they get from the guy next door who makes cabinets or whatever, right? And they're running their welders. They're running serious industrial power off these pot-bellied stoves, essentially. And they've gone beyond that. Now they're so believing it, they're developing manufacturing capabilities to put this technology in other people's hands. And so we hooked up with them and purchased a couple initial units. And so the way it works is that I put this in the back of my 1992 Ford Festiva that I pulled out of the bushes as a test vehicle. That's the refinery, right? You put in wood in the top. My preferred fuel right now is kukui nuts. Put kukui nuts in. It produces hydrogen carbon monoxide. Goes out that blue hose into the air intake of the engine. Now you've got combustible gases going into the intake. There's no gas in the car at all. We pulled the entire fuel tank off, so we have combustible gas going into the air intake. You turn the key, the sparks combust the gas, and it runs just like a standard engine.